Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, leading at the intersection of business, innovation, and law. I'm Lucy Saddleton, Managing Editor at the Legal Innovation Forum. Brought to you today in association with Litera, this episode features a panel discussion at the Legal Innovation Forum Toronto 2026 on the impact of Agentic AI. Our expert panelists dive into the shift from manual workflows to intelligent AI-enabled systems, and they examine the importance of balancing innovation with a strong governance framework and ensuring human judgment remains at the center of every decision.
My name is Shirin Mirsaeidi, and I'm a partner with Deloitte. My background is in private practice in M&A and capital markets for a number of years. And now I lead Deloitte's outsourcing and legal ops practice. And I'm very happy to be here with you guys. And I'm going to pass it on to our wonderful panel to introduce themselves. Maybe we start from there.
Sure. Thanks, Shirin. And hello, everyone. Also want to thank the LIF and Andrew for putting this session together. It's going to be great. Looking forward to it. So my name is Imran Ahmad. I'm a partner at the law firm Norton Rose Fulbright, primarily based in Toronto, but I split my time across our Montreal and Toronto offices. I head up our technology law practice. So obviously we're going to talk about AI. A lot of the work I do is on digital risk, so cybersecurity, privacy, obviously artificial intelligence, in the context of commercial transactions. So I've been doing this for about 20 years and looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, I'm Corinne Geller. I'm a VP of product at Litera. And in my role, I run the legal knowledge engineering team and the legal product consultant team. So both teams of lawyers, one that's more focused on working on the product, training AI, thinking about the future of how our legal tools should work. And then the other team goes into law firms and works directly with the lawyers to make sure they're using the tools properly as they would use it. And before I was in this role, which I joined through Kira about 9 years ago, I was a practicing lawyer at Stikeman.
Hi everyone, my name is Omeed Arlani. I'm from Omers. I manage the legal operations team. We're responsible for commercial contracting for the enterprise, corporate insurance, all the legal technology, and currently the implementation and training for AI solutions.
Great. I'm Arun Krishnamurti. I think I have the least impressive title, but I'm a senior counsel with Google here in Toronto. I've been there about 9 years, and obviously have seen sort of the growth of a lot of our AI solutions from the inside. And hopefully we'll have a chance to kind of explain the way we do things a little bit and where we see things going.
Awesome. So I think our first question centers around the shift from AI to agentic AI. I think the hot topic in legal innovations has shifted to agentic AI, but a lot of folks, as we've seen in the panels and the discussion so far, are still figuring out the integration of, let's call it a regular AI or pre-agentic AI or whatever we want to call it. And I wanted to ask each of you, where does AI adoption stand today at your organizations? Maybe, Omeed, we can start with you and sort of talk about what's working, what the limitations are, and where things are with Omers.
Sure, happy to kick it off. So I think AI adoption at our organization predominantly, we're looking at the investment teams, the finance teams, and more recently legal. We spent much of 2025 testing a variety of solutions. We were focusing more on the off-the-shelf solutions at this stage versus internally built. So recently, we looked at partnering with Harvey, and as part of that, we've started a rollout to several lawyers within the enterprise legal team. The original focus predominantly being around contract review, risk identification. That's gone extremely well. We've seen at least 40% in time savings related to that work already right out the gate. And I always like to call out one member of the team who is very anti-machine at first, and now currently he's the #1 user of the solution, which is where the analytics on the back end help quite a bit. Now we're looking at shifting towards more automation for certain tasks in the privacy space, in the employment legal space. So It's developing slowly, but I think it's we have a top-down focus on lifting the floor. So really looking at trying to train the various legal leaders within the group.
So I think, would you say the limitation is in the training and the slower adoption?
Yeah, I would say that's the predominant limitation at this point. I think once people start to use it and get really used to the tools, I don't think there's a way back. I think it just becomes part of your day-to-day. It almost becomes a thought partner. And it allows you to conduct multiple tasks at the same time. Sometimes, for example, we'll put a query through the system or ask it to do something, walk away, answer another couple of emails, come back, the work's done, you start reviewing it. So there isn't that lag time in between. You don't have to sit there and watch it working. You can kind of focus on other tasks.
Thank you. And Imran, from the other end of things, at Norton Rose, where are you guys with the AI adoption and any limitations that you guys are
look, I'll come at it from a slightly different perspective because we can talk about how we use it at our firm, which I'm happy to speak about. I sit on the steering committee, but also what clients are looking at, generally speaking. And so broad strokes, Canadian large multinationals or international companies with Canadian branches, here's what they're looking at. Leadership and board are trying to figure out, what are the outcomes we want? How can we use AI? Everybody wants to use it. They're not exactly sure where to use it exactly. Is it for efficiencies on the back end? Is it front-facing for consumers, for delivery of product or services? They want to know what those KPIs are going to be and how they can manage it. And then what are those proof of concept? What does the workflow look like? I think one of the challenges they're having, and I think Omeed, you raised a great example of time saving. So, if you can reduce time, arguably you're being more productive.
Yeah.
How do you actually measure that? Is it a direct proportionality or is it something slightly different? We're seeing those very detailed and granular discussions about how are you measuring success. So if we are using, for example, an AI, a generative AI tool for contract review or for ingestion of large volumes of submissions for an RFP, for example, and then selecting a short list, what does the time savings look like? And how are we saving dollars at the end of the day? Internally, from a legal department perspective, it's interesting. This is really odd for me because I get the stats. We get the license uses from our different lawyers. It's the older lawyers who are really testing the limits of the tool. So I'll give you an example of something we had recently, which is actually quite indicative of how clients are using it and how lawyers are being asked to use it. So cybersecurity incident, client is a large multinational in Canada, has a subsidiary in the US, and it's ransom negotiation related. Now, ransom negotiation as a general proposition is a bit of an art. You have a hacker on the other end, you have a ransom negotiation firm, you have the client and the counsel who are basically giving direction to the negotiator how to do it. So there's a lot of judgment call in that piece. So we're about 2-3 weeks in. The client ultimately didn't end up paying because they just wanted to buy time to get notifications and other pieces out. But at one point, the in-house counsel sends us an email and says, here's a tool that we use internally in our legal department. I ran our strategy and what we're doing, and here's the next 5 steps it's recommending. What do you think? So I was working on this file with one of my partners, John Counsel in Calgary. And John and I looked at it and go, it's not inaccurate. It's actually pretty good. There's some context missing, some risk analysis, in terms of the reputational harm and the moral and ethical issues that the board was looking at on the client side, but it was pretty good. So all this to say, clients are double checking the work that they're giving out to external counsel. I had a separate conversation with another GC 2 weeks ago in a social gathering, and he basically said, we have a lot of competition law issues that come up, totally outside of my area of expertise. So we will basically do a quick review and assessment through an AI tool, which is very much driven for the legal department, and then we'll have external counsel validate whether the analysis is complete, incomplete, or there's another angle, but it's a good starting point instead of starting from scratch and doing all that work. All this to say, I think people are testing the limits of how far you can take it. And I think when we'll get into the question of agentic AI, the potential is much higher, but the risks are also proportionately higher.
And Arun, any reactions or thoughts?
No, I mean, I think Imran's right that there's a lot of, it's growing use depending on the organization, certainly. I think, for someone like us, a lot of our tools are built in-house. And so there's sort of widespread adoption because it's built into the workflow kind of from the bottom up. So a lot of the products we use day to day, there's, Jim and I built into our email suite and docs and all these things. And so it becomes it really becomes second nature to use it in different elements, to refine some text or to review an email, summarize a chain, do all that kind of stuff. So they really want to make it almost like just a routine part of the business. There's obviously a widespread variety of tools, and across the different business units, so I'll use them differently. Within legal, we have our own sort of strategy for where certain tools are appropriate. But there's a lot of effort being put into sort of AI coding tools and things like that do more complex tasks that will not touch my day-to-day work, I hope. But certainly for some other people, they find them incredibly valuable. And so really they want it, it's transformational for many organizations.
Amazing. Moving slightly, shifting to what we think in terms of what agentic AI is. I want to start with you, Corinne, on how you define it and why it should matter to this room and this audience in particular.
Yeah, so I think agentic AI is really more than one task being done at a time and more options between tasks. So a lot of autonomy for an agent to finish one thing and move on to the next and decide between a bunch of options and be able to deliver an outcome on its own. So lots of different ways to use it, and still a lot of ways to use traditional AI that are now connected. So you connect different traditional forms of single point AI or single skills, as we call them, and you connect them together in a workflow, but allow it to only operate within a certain boundary.
Amazing. And what about how would you define it and how you think why it should matter to all of us?
I think so. Corinne did a good job with the definition. I think the one thing that I like to always flag for people is that it's kind of a bit of an umbrella term for let's call it like levels of acting autonomously. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like kind of a binary switch between your traditional Gen AI prompt response kind of tool, but there are levels to how much human approval is needed. Whether you have something go out and summarize and provide you with some collated research, to something that's able to make and action decisions on its own. So it's one thing to review your inbox, create draft emails for you to sort of like edit and then send, versus send out responses to like common requests from a predetermined set of responses or frequently asked questions. So making sure that you understand that it's a continuum more than anything else, I think is highly relevant for the way people think about it.
Agreed. Omeed, your thoughts on how you institutionally define it? And
I think our definition is consistent. It's the ability to break things up into subtasks, to be able to use tools autonomously that you allow connections to, and the ability to access information, whether internal or external, to the extent that you permit it to. I think the definitions are pretty consistent. Yeah.
I was going to say, Imran, going back to our earlier discussion, how are your clients adopting it and internally as well? Like, what are you seeing that's happening?
Yeah, if I could maybe just go back to the definition, I think a story often tells a great point at the end of the day. You look at generative AI, it's usually the user, the individual human, who's typing in a prompt and getting a result out. I think with agentic AI, here's what the objective is, go get it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if anybody listens to podcasts from the Wall Street Journal. There's one, it's available, it's called The Journal. And in it, they talked about one of the first uses of agentic AI, which was the engineer wanted to get a reservation at a very popular New York-based restaurant. Impossible to get a reservation. The objective was, please get me a reservation at this restaurant. Now, this agent was only enabled to, in principle, go online, find the web page to make the reservation, unsuccessful. The agent took it upon itself to take a voice, or sort of a voice that was generated by the agent, to make a phone call, and at one point even manipulate the person receiving the call at the restaurant to get a reservation for that individual. So when we talk about agency as a general proposition in law, it is me, the individual, who's giving another person or another entity the ability to do certain things within guardrails. Mm-hmm. The challenge, and this is where the risk on agentic AI comes in, and I'm sure we'll get into it, is how sure are you that those guardrails are not going to be broken by this agent? And so I think that's the risk. The opportunity on the flip side is exactly what Omeed, Corinne, and Arun talked about, which is how can you do multiple tasks with an ultimate objective to get it done? So I used it. I'll give an example. It's not a client example, it's a personal example. So my lovely wife had an idea of renovating the basement this year. By the way, I'm really bad at designs and organizing those kind of things. I'm horrible. We basically use a tool, shout out to Google, we use Gemini, to basically tell, this is the kind of vision we want, design it, find out what do we need, how much time it would take, and then give it to the contractor as a full package. And so it was everything from getting pricing on products, to getting the design samples, to getting a variety of other things. So it's doing a lot of things to get the end objective done. That is what really the opportunity of agentic AI is. Well, the flip side is, if you give it too much without any clear guardrails, it can go offside. Yeah.
Those are really interesting examples. What is this New York reservation tool? I'm just kidding. In terms of same thing on Gemini, I just use it to plan a trip.
I love this. You're doing my job.
Yeah. But in the kind of the legal sphere, Imran, are you seeing it being adopted and used in a way that kind of stands out to you, whether internally or externally?
Yeah, I think one area where it's super helpful, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, so often either legal operations or procurement in a department, especially for large multinationals or public sector companies, are going to have a situation where they have to go to market. So they have to develop an RFP process, they have to shortlist a variety of organizations that are going to be invited, they have to prepare template agreements in some cases, and then they have to enter into negotiations. And let's just take the example of an RFP which would have multiple entities that are invited. So what you're having them use is these agents. So there's a master individual human who's overseeing all of this, creating individual agents who are going to go do different aspects of the RFP procurement process, and then an overlayered agent. So these are very technical pieces, who's going to look at it, triage it, and give a recommendation to the human at the end of the day. And that human ultimately is going to make the call, whether, yes, we're going to escalate this to second round, third round, or ultimately a decision to who won. So we're seeing it in procurement, especially for large global procurement initiatives. That's happening a lot. And it's very tightly controlled right now. So legal or compliance or procurement, those three departments are actively engaged in that piece. They've also included, just to mitigate any downside to this, an appeal process. So if a vendor is excluded through that agentic AI procurement process, they still have an opportunity to say, why were we not passed along to the second term or round? And then how can we potentially answer them from that perspective?
That is consistent with what we're also seeing in the market. And Arun, same question for you.
I'm seeing it a lot on the sort of like administration side. There are agents that sort of everybody can deploy to, triage your inbox, to provide you with a list of, your to-dos, summary of things you haven't responded to, or, nudges for particular things. It can help you prepare for meetings. So if you go through, you have something on the calendar, it can say, here's some things from your last meeting that you need to follow up on. And that sort of like proactive step work to decide what's important in context and to how to sort of enable you to do your job more effectively or not forget things. Not that anybody would ever forget to do something, but maybe you haven't responded to somebody for a few days and it's gotten pushed down, and then being able to nudge that sort of stuff up is incredibly useful. So we're seeing a lot of tools along that vein that can sort of continuously operate, but to make sure that you are operating at your best. So very human oriented, but meant to be sort of a force multiplier, like to kind of be that admin support that you may not always have in your practice in-house.
Makes sense. Moving the automation waterline higher and higher.
In a positive, human-oriented way for the record.
Yeah. And Omeed, what are you seeing in terms of adoption, agentic AI, and kind of, are you guys using it in-house? Are you thinking of future ways of integrating it into the day-to-day?
Yeah, so I think one workflow which is becoming more prevalent is around regulatory monitoring. So the ability to have agents where you have an agent that is going out and it is scanning the relevant jurisdictions that you've pre-identified for the subject matter that you've identified, bringing that information back internally, and then having another agent that is designed to be able to process that information and be able to have an output in a format that you've requested, and be able to send an email to a user to say, this update has come up, you may want to give it a look. Now, this may be stemming into a question that may come slightly later, which is around, that's what I'm seeing today. The way I see it kind of happening tomorrow is going to be, you have the agent that goes out, pulls the data. You have the agent that reviews that data, does an assessment, but then you're going to have another agent that's going to look at your internal policies and determine whether or not there's an impact to internal policies, or whether any updates are required to your internal policies, as well as potentially templates to contracts. Does this require an update to the contract? Then what it's going to do is it's going to come out, it's going to provide you the recommended red lines to those policies and guidelines, the recommended red lines to the templates that you've pointed it to, and then it's going to send it to Counsel to review and make an assessment as to whether or not this works. It can even take it a step further, where you could have an applicability assessment done, where if you have a really good profile of your entities and your corporate structure, jurisdiction, number of employees, et cetera, if you can build that out in a database, it can even do an initial applicability assessment and say, based on this area of law and this jurisdiction, here are the entities that are likely impacted by this updated regulation. So I think today it's very basic. It's monitor, provide output report, someone internally reviews it. I think tomorrow you're going to have a 6 to 7 agent workflow, which is going to do that applicability assessment, going to do that drafting, going to make the red line recommendations for you, and then it becomes more of a, does 80% of the work, and you're there to kind of add the judgment, do the 20%, agree, disagree, and move forward.
You're doing my job for me. That's a perfect segue. Corinne, same question. Yeah. I know it's a bit of a crystal ball ask, but what do you think are the future capabilities and applications of agentic AI?
Endless. But even short term, there's so much in diligence. There was years where people reviewed everything, and then with scope memos, we shortened it to just, the top X number of contracts. And now with agentic AI, stuff that you just didn't look at all, you can have an agent go in, pull that stuff that you were going to get no insights from anyway. So even though we always want the human in the loop, but if no human was going to look at it anyways, all you're doing is getting additional benefit. So you could have an agent run, pull all that information out, and pump it right into your template report. Also with playbooks, law firms can probably take on a lot more work for their clients that they, was probably too expensive before. But with having a playbook, having, high volume contracts come in, compare it to the playbook, and if there's not a whole lot of difference, there doesn't have to be a lot of human review. Yes, there's just still these days there have to be human review, but that can be completely more automated as years go on, and also as comfort levels, increase with agentic AI.
And Imran, from a law firm perspective, how do you see the future applications and how it reshapes workflows and how we provide service to our clients and implications in there?
So a couple of things. One, I'll talk just hard dollars and cents, because I think that's important. Omeed gave a great example. We talk about these global regulatory charts, very popular back in the day, very expensive to do as well, because you needed to find counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. They had to pull the information. They had to make sure it fit to your question that was being asked. And then you had to basically ingest that, figure out what you need to do internally to comply with it. Now that can be done very quickly, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, especially if you look like a large bank perspective, that you're saving on that. So that's a significant piece. Second piece, and I'll give an example, because like I said, I sit on the steering committee, and we've been grappling on pricing. Time and material won't work. It will be a combination of a hybrid of maybe time and material, AFA, fixed fees, and so on. So as an example, we used a tool at our firm, which is Harvey, and one of our clients gave us a very basic contract. So we sent it to one of our associates in our commercial contracting group. He spent about 3 hours, so let's say average rate, just to round out numbers, $500 an hour, that's $1,500. The tool itself ran it within 10, 15 minutes max. And then let's say you layer on 1 hour time to further review to see if it's complete, accurate, context, and all that stuff. So you can see there's like a 1,500 time material, and there's, let's say, a 500 plus give and take. How do you manage that? So what I've been seeing more and more, especially on the US and the European side, is a technology fee, sort of license use fee, for example, plus a minimal time and material expenditure. So the cost is coming down. And a lot more cost certainty to do basic rote type of tasks, run-of-the-mill agreements, NDAs, for example, very standard ones, they can be done pretty quickly through these tools. So a combination of AFAs. And I think generally speaking, although we often think law firms are not very keen on changing the billing model, they do realize that if we don't change, the time and material model is going to be gone anyways. So there's a lot more experimentation. And for those of you in the room, you should have these conversations with your external counsel, say, how can we be creative here, even if it's on a test proof of concept basis on a couple of files, to see how we can actually figure that piece out together.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think that value-based billing and switching, the transitioning into the new models of billing is something that hopefully everybody's experimenting with and everybody's figuring their way around. Wonderfully put. I want to come back to you, Arun, on your advice on strategy and integration. And what do organizations need to do to get ready for agentic AI and integrate it to their workflows and how they do work?
I think having those conversations is a good place to start, right? If you try and identify the areas of your work that may not be producing the highest level of value or that are eating up a disproportionate amount of time, I think, carefully understanding where your folks are spending your time is probably step one. I think understanding the vast array of opportunities and products that are available. Obviously I have my professional bias, but also there are a million great tools to be used for your specific workflow, right? That depending on your exact need, that do a variety of things. And so understanding what the menu looks like, I think, is critical, because a lot of these agents are increasingly able to cooperate together and work together. So you don't have to have necessarily a one-stop solution. You can develop a protocol that uses particular different products that can connect together for whatever you need. The advice is always to try and get as many, a diverse array of levels of seniority and perspectives on the impact it'll have, so you really understand, the actual work, the need, the possibilities, and to see what would be most helpful. So having those conversations as early as you can, I think, is important, and obviously not to rush the decision, I think.
That makes sense. Corinne, your thoughts, reactions to that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Don't really have anything else to add.
Good job. Omeed, coming back to you and what Imran just mentioned in terms of law firm evolution and on pricing, I want to ask you, for in-house legal teams, what are you seeing or hoping to see in terms of pricing and delivery models from your legal service providers?
So more recently, we're getting law firms are disclosing their use of AI and actually requesting permission in order to use it ahead of an engagement. So that's been a bit of a switch. I think it's a bit early to understand the implications of AI usage at the firms and the efficiencies that are there. And I think it becomes even harder when you see the rates are kind of going up by anywhere from 10 to 20% depending on the role year over year. So then it's, even if you see efficiencies with AI, the rates are going up. So how does that work out? I do think alternative fee models, to your point, are going to be an evolution, a necessary step, adopting the consulting firm model of like a percentage technology fee in order to reduce costs. Maybe an appropriate step at that point. What I'd like to see with the use of these tools, like if we look at a contract review, for example, right now, internally on our end, we built out kind of a 3-step process for contract review. We have a prompt that's been built, tested, it's about yay big, for let's say a SaaS agreement. So we always run the prompt first. Our secondary step is we compare our internal software as a service template to the agreement. And our third step is just a catch-all. Are there any other material risks? So we kind of have a 3-step process. And we've used this in the past. And a 60-page contract gets reviewed in roughly, whereas before it would have been maybe like 5 hours, maybe 6, depending on the comfort level of the individual. Now it's being reviewed in about 2.5, with a high quality output. But what that does is that allows us that, let's say someone leaves the organization and I have someone new starting. They don't know what our standards are. It's going to take some time to get them up to speed. There's going to be a ton of questions. At least out the gate now, we know that there is this 3-step process that they can apply day one, and then they can apply their expertise on top of that, and then we can have a chat if they're uncomfortable with a particular decision that needs to be made. So tying that back to the law firms, there's been a lot of talk around impacts to juniors, people coming through the system, first, second year, third year lawyers. My opinion is I think there's an opportunity there for that level of lawyer, because if these types of workflows are built within the law firms, it would mean that those lawyers are going to be able to have an output that is probably more equivalent to someone that has probably 8 to 10 years of experience. It allow them to actually process more documentation in a shorter period of time. And then really your senior lawyers, partners, et cetera, are there to be the judgment, to help with decision making if there's any ambiguities, to be that control step before it goes to a client. I still think that's quite important. And if that type of approach is adopted, my assumption is we should see that reducing over time, the costs. But again, that's a very early thought.
Thank you for that. I want to switch gears a little bit, being cautious of time, because we want to cover one of the most important aspects of AI generally, and genetic AI, which is responsible deployment, including managing data risk, protecting sensitive information, and ensuring robust cybersecurity practices. Imran, I want to ask you, how do you think autonomous workflows change the risk profile of AI? And how do you protect against those risks and monitor them effectively?
Right. There's an article, if you're ever interested, Harvard Law School Corporate Governance Forum. They publish and republish third-party articles from law firms, consultancies, and so on. And there's an article by the Conference Board in the US that looked at S&P 500 companies. And they identified what their disclosure looked like in their annual reports. And they looked at 2023, 24, and 25. You went from 12% of companies in 23 disclosing their AI risk to 72% last year. The disclosures were 3 buckets. I won't go through all of them, but essentially the 3 buckets were cybersecurity, reputational harm, and regulatory compliance. And you had this small line in that article which said, with the advent of agentic AI, this is going to be something to look out for in 2026, and here we are now. In April, so fast forward, so that came out in October. In April, you all probably would have heard about Anthropic and their Mythos model that came out. It was actually not publicly released, but an announcement was made that they had developed. It was an edge model. It was initially designed to identify vulnerabilities in their IT environment or in anybody who's deploying it. But they soon realized that it was capable of exploiting those, even though there was no instruction to do so. And so the risk became that things that could be exploited once, so for example, if I'm trying to break into somebody's house, I'll break through the door or a window. What Mythos can do, in principle, is I can break into 3 windows at the same time by identifying 3 vulnerabilities and attacking and using it at the same time. So are you going from a linear to a multi-attack environment? Interestingly enough, OpenAI has its own model that they are looking and testing. They also ran it, they found vulnerabilities, but only 20% were common vulnerabilities, meaning Mythos found 80% that were not identified by OpenAI's tool, and OpenAI found 80% that were not identified by Mythos. So coming back to your question, Mythos was not released. They brought together 40 companies, and I think Google was part of them as well, but Microsoft, financial institutions, various regulators in the US say, look, this is coming. Like, if not us, somebody else is going to develop this. There's a bit of a lead time, but you better get on top of it to make sure we address these vulnerabilities. Same thing in Canada, same thing in Europe. I'm pretty skeptical when I hear these things, because as a general proposition, maybe it's some cybersecurity firm that wants to push this a little further and get some mandates. I am blessed to be, privy to some national security stuff because of my previous role at one of them, and it's real. So there's a real concern about critical infrastructure, financial, energy, transportation in particular, that could be exploited by these agentic or any kind of AI tools used by bad actors. So coming back to your question specifically, what does the risk look like? As a general proposition, to run AI tools, you're actually increasing your digital surface. You're either creating or collecting more data. The points of entry may be increased as well because you typically have a stack for IT. It's not just one homogeneous stack that you're using various third-party vendor tools. And if there's zero-day vulnerability that even the vendor is not aware of, there's potential entry points into your IT environment. So the risk is materially higher. And what we expect to see, not today, but most likely in the next 6 to 18 months, is an acceleration of number of attacks. And so frequency doesn't mean they're successful, but the frequency. And we're going to see if they do get through a significant impact on severity. Last point, the question we get is, well, what do we do about this? It's not just a technology issue. It's not a question of if you're going to get hits, how you respond to it. So making sure those critical patching pieces are accelerated. So if it was 5 days, reduce it to 1. And it's easier said than done because there's some system integrity issues that come into play. Making sure your protocols and resources are all in place beforehand so you can respond as quickly as possible. And there are a couple of other pieces out there, tons of resources if you like to access them, but certainly just be prepared for it as much as possible ahead of time.
Thank you very much. And Arun, from your perspective,
maybe
what are your thoughts?
I'll take it a little narrower because I think Imran certainly got it covered from a industry perspective. If you're talking about the deployment specifically of these sorts of tools in your usage sort of day to day, so what many of us are concerned with, the way we create and operate these agents, I think you want to look for a few things. One is certainly, I'm in favor of, at least at the early stages, keeping a human in the loop, particularly the critical decisions. As a lawyer, you're going to be responsible for the work product that goes out the door with your name on it or under your direction. So pay attention to what's produced, maybe approve it before it goes out the door. Not rocket science. But I think when you're looking at these tools, I think you want to look for a couple of things. One is your ability to set and enforce guardrails. I think a number of folks talked about it today, but the rule set around what the tool is allowed to do and how far it can take its decision. It operates within this framework independently, but it should not be able to go beyond it without your approval. And then the third, I think, is you're going to want to look for some amount of transparency and auditability. Like you wanted to explain why it made certain choices or what steps at least it took along the way, even if you can't get it to sort of purely explain its reason why it chose between two options, let's say. Because if you want to revisit the decision and figure out what broke, like all AI tools, your organization and you specifically need to do some sort of periodic monitoring of the deployment to make sure that you're keeping an eye on it and to make sure it isn't out there manipulating folks to get a reservation or doing things out of the box, because there are, countless stories of agents going a bit beyond, but often it's the fault of, sometimes a failure of the prompt, sometimes a failure of the model, sometimes a failure of the guardrails. But that's partly why all of these tools are necessary if you're going to use them in your practice, and many of us will.
Although the phone call with a reso should be.
Yeah,
that's why.
Worst problems to have, sure.
Thank you very much. We have a minute left. I want to see if anyone has any questions.
So I'll repeat the question in case folks couldn't hear, and please, if I didn't get it right, correct me. Essentially, the anecdote was you have a law firm where you can basically pull pieces together from different sources, put a letter together, but the lawyer you were speaking with essentially said, I'd rather put it together myself, and hence spend more time or write it from scratch. That's a conversation you need to have with the lawyer, but as a general proposition, I think you're the client, you have right to ask questions, you certainly have right to understand how they're going to put letters together. And candidly, if I was in your place, I'd say, well, you can do the drafting, I want to see both options. It's up to the lawyer who's trying to win your work at the end of the day to show you there's a better work product, either drafting it from scratch versus the piecemeal, for example, that's put together with an AI tool. I'm not 100% convinced for a basic letter that there would be huge advantage in drafting it from scratch, to be honest with you. The one caveat I will say, and we didn't maybe get into it too much in our discussion, is I think for a lot of the run-of-the-mill work, AI is fantastic. I think you're going to see huge efficiencies and a lot of that work being pushed down. I think for the more complex matters, creative tax structuring on a deal, for example, I'm not sure AI is going to be just as creative or novel. I also think in litigation, although there's some great aspects to it, I'm not sure a strategy is going to be as unique because it's built on looking at data from the past to predict in the future. So depending on the task you're going to be assigning to your external counsel, you would want to absolutely have the conversation. I don't see a lawyer not having the conversation with you. And it's incumbent on the external lawyer, to show and explain to you why one model they think is going to be better than the other. And certainly you can challenge that.
This lawyer thought that if I get the AI to do it, then that's less billable hours for me. So that was the...
Oh, sure. I mean, look, we can spend a ton of time on this. I'm pretty old now, so I can go back in time. I remember when e-discovery was not existent, right? You had armies of people walking into the client's offices for various reviews, pulling files, tagging yellow, green, red, and then producing it for Competition Bureau or other purposes. And then e-discovery came along and saved client time, efficiency, and a variety of other things. And at that time, law firms were like, we're going to cannibalize our associate time. We're learning by reading various boxes of banker box of documents. Not sure that's true. But in hindsight, it moved away from it. Efficiencies will always trump the older way of spending more time and effort and resource, which is not as efficient. I think that lawyer may think that may be the case. I'm not sure they're going to be able to adapt as quickly if they keep that mindset.
Yeah, because since we were talking about adoption, that was my question. And the other thing, now that we have everyone's using the tools, you have in-house who are using the tools and private practice. So it's sort of the democratization of legal services. Then how do firms differentiate themselves so that they'll say, okay, that's the firm that I want to work with?
Yeah.
Because everybody's got the same tools.
It's a great question. I'll tell you, in my team, so I have a team of 25 lawyers in my technology group that I run. One of the big concerns I had was, are these juniors, so first, second, third years, using AI to learn the law, or are they actually applying judgment to the law, which is two different things. And I wanted to be very, very sure that they're applying judgment to the law, because that's what clients are paying for. And the creativity that goes along with it. Just if I could go on for maybe 30 seconds.
No problem.
I teach a course at the University of Toronto on cyber, but also this year we're teaching on AI. I literally this morning got guidelines from the faculty saying we are very concerned that students can pre-generate through AI answers to your exam questions because they're available year after year. We're encouraging adjunct professors now to not allow the use or limit the use of laptops in the classroom, and not to let them actually have pre-populated and should be closed book exams that are being administered. And the rationale they provided was, we want critical and creative thinking in law. They're very big on that piece at the University of Toronto. I'm sure it's the same at other faculties as well. So I think that's going to be the key. Those firms, if they're able to have specialized expertise to think creatively and to be real subject matter expert where they can take context and put it together, they're going to be fine. I think it's the ones that try to repeat the same thing by using the same tool are not going to be able to adapt to the reality of tomorrow.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for the next episode.